That handsome guy right there? That's my dad. I want to take a few minutes to tell you about him. Specifically, I want to tell you about the most important thing my dad ever did. Thomas Wesley Zdanio was born on October 2nd, 1941. He grew up in an average home in Detroit, Michigan with his parents and his younger brother. His teen years were lived out in the 1950s with all the glory you'd expect as a teenager back in those times. He spent some time studying in college, then at 25 years of age he decided to join the U.S. Navy. Aboard an aircraft carrier, the USS Randolph, he traveled all around Europe in the North Atlantic. His job as a journalist for the ship's newspaper often allowed him to travel by helicopter days ahead of the ship to write up reviews and helpful information for the sailors at the ports they would be docking at. Dad served his country well in the Navy. But that wasn't the most important thing my dad ever did. Just a few days after he was discharged from the Navy, his brother, Bob, wanted Dad to meet his brand new wife, Charlene. Unbeknownst to any of them, Charlene's friend, Eve, planned to stop by. At that chance meeting, Tom met the woman that was to become his very best friend and the absolute love of his life. 5 months later, they were married, June 9th, 1967, the beginning of a marriage that lasted for a lifetime. He adored Eve every one of those days. Like every marriage, they had some highs and lows, but together, Tom and Eve warmed the lives of everyone they knew. Together, they loved people. But even though their marriage touched so many people, this also wasn't the most important thing my dad ever did. Over the next several years, they had 3 children, Brenda, Kathy, and me, Eddie. Although we often argue about which one of us was his favorite, we can all agree on this. He loved us all, with all of his heart. While we were still little kids, he bought a sailboat and carried us all over Lake Huron, Lake St. Clair, and into the Canadian North Channel. He was an expert sailor and participated in many boat races, even ice boat races. For those of you who don't know what that is, imagine being out in the middle of a frozen lake on a thin metal frame with a sail in 70 miles an hour, icy, cold wind. And yep, he loved it. Even though he was a great sailor, that wasn't the most important thing my dad ever did. Tom was a family man. He invested in all of us in so many ways. It seemed like we were always traveling together as a family somewhere. Florida, Washington, D.C., Missouri, up north in Michigan, even into Canada. Even life around home was interesting for us too. He bought a few farm animals, sheep, goats, cows, pigs, and chickens. Of course, there was always dogs and cats. And guess who took care of them? Yep, me and my sisters. He taught us responsibility and the value of hard work, even against our protest on family work days. Hard work, that describes Dad well, and quite an entrepreneur as well. He was always busy building and even running a small local ice cream business. One day while selling ice cream, he met a lady who was looking for a builder, specifically someone who could build a log home. He had plenty of building experience, but never a log home. This one log home led to another, and then another, and eventually became the industry that defined him and a large portion of his life. He built homes all across the Great Lakes and eventually all over the United States. He won many awards for his ability to build, sell, and train others in the art of building log homes. His experience and ability continued to develop and carried him to build log homes and train others as far away as Turkey, Romania, Germany, Russia, Hungary, Denmark, and Ireland. He was an expert log home builder. But that wasn't the most important thing he ever did. Eventually, he gained a son-in-law, Daryl, and a daughter-in-law, Julie. He loved them as much as he loved the rest of the family. And so, eventually grandchildren entered the picture. 5 in all: Ethan, Wesley, Haley, Shelby, and Emmy. Wow, what a grandpa. He loved those kids so much. That's where his joke telling and practical joking began to reach its perfection. He had had a lifetime of practice, and now it was time to unleash his experience on this new generation. The fart machine, the fake body parts, the rubber dog poop, the fake puke, and the endless corny jokes. They had a new life with his grandkids. Have you ever heard the story about how his jawbone was replaced with a dog jawbone? Yeah, his grandchildren heard that too, over and over again. They fell for it every time. Yeah, he was a practical joker who loved his grandchildren with all of his heart. But even that wasn't the most important thing he ever did. Dad loved people, really loved them. Together, everywhere Tom and Eve went, everything that they were involved with, they just loved people. Everyone felt warm and welcome around them. No matter who you were or where you came from, young or old, cool or weird, important or unknown, you were welcomed and loved by Tom and Eve. They invested in people everywhere they went. Builders and salesmen and friends of friends, youth groups and more. Dad always had a good time and always made sure everyone around him was having a good time as well. If you had a chance to know him, then surely you already know that. But deeply loving people isn't the most important thing he ever did. In 1980, when the rest of the world was fighting the Cold War and caught up in big hair and bright colors and weird music, Dad did something important, very important. Right in the middle of his life, in the middle of all those accomplishments I just told you about, Dad had a friend who invited him to his house for a Bible study. Now, Dad had been casually involved in church his whole life. Catechism, First Communion, married by a priest, a trip to church on Christmas or Easter. But going to a house for a Bible study was something entirely new. He agreed to go, and this became the first step that led him to surrender his life to Jesus. Do you want to know the most important thing my dad ever did? That was it. My dad discovered that he wasn't perfect. Everybody who knew him already knew that. But Dad realized that in God's eyes, he had broken a few of the rules. Maybe more than a few, but that's not the point. Dad realized that he wouldn't be able to excuse away the things he did wrong. Although I don't know of a better man than my dad, even he knew that he couldn't do enough good things to make up for the bad things. That's not how it works. Dad discovered that no one can erase those things. In that Bible study, Dad learned that everyone is separated from God because of sin. And those sins bring on punishment, eternal punishment. But God sent Jesus, the Son of God, to die in our place. And everyone who's willing to put their trust in Jesus for forgiveness of sin is then made right with God. Dad discovered the most important truth in all of space and time. It is told pretty concisely in one of the verses in his Bible, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. When Dad did this, everything changed. Yeah, he was still the same Tom everyone knew and loved, but there was an entirely new definition to his life. He didn't just have a religious experience or a spiritual moment in time. Dad really met Jesus. And the more he studied and learned, the more he gave his life to following Jesus. He knew what he believed, and he lived what he believed. Not necessarily flawlessly, but definitely passionately. His decision also spilled over into Eve's decision to follow Jesus as well, and all three of his children. As a matter of fact, anyone who knew Dad for more than a few minutes would know he was following Jesus and desired for others to hear the same good news that changed his life. He gave much of his life to serving God the best he could, in every way he could. He gave and served and volunteered in so many ways, especially with teens. He loved them, taking them on canoe trips and amusement parks and church camps, and often just inviting them into his house for food and games. In the last couple years of Dad's life, his health wasn't what it used to be. He had to slow down quite a bit. He still got around the best he could, but God still had a job for him. He told me time and time again that for some strange reason he kept waking up at exactly 2:22 a.m. He would look at the clock and lay there trying to go back to sleep. Night after night this happened. He began praying during this time each night. A few months before he went home to be with Jesus, he called me to tell me specifically what he'd been praying for. He would lay in bed at that odd time night after night and think about all the people he had ever known. Everyone, even people he hadn't thought of in many years, whether it was old school friends back in Detroit, or friends from the Navy, or all the various jobs or travel. For every single person he could think of, he would pray two specific things. Number one, that God would draw them to himself, and number two, that they would respond to God's call to turn to his son Jesus. I guess if Dad knew you, then you can be sure he prayed this prayer for you. You know, I think that's the second most important thing my dad ever did. And it's so closely related to the decision he made to follow Jesus. He wanted everyone he ever knew, all throughout his amazing, storied, and adventurous life, to experience the same hope, healing, forgiveness, and freedom that he found in Jesus. Thanks, Pop. Thanks for leading Mom and me and my sisters to meet your Jesus. We miss you so much, but we look forward to seeing you again someday, because you led us to Jesus.